When you sit down in the theatre to watch a play, the hope is that you're not thinking about the audience around you. Unless the actors are exceedingly dull, or your neighbour is texting or chatting or chewing throughout, the individual should fade into the black anonymity of the crowd. You should become lost in the narrative. Likewise, the actors aren't really thinking about the audience, because although they have to consider their reactions, their emotions, their mood, they themselves are concerned with building up that narrative, structuring it. They get lost in their characters. There is only really one person who gets to remain separate, who gets to have a dialogue, as it were, with the audience and consider their viewership. And that's the playwright at the beginning of the process. And if we then move backwards to the beginnings of theatre, and to tragedy more specifically, to ancient Athens and the theatre festival to Dionysus, a place where plays were political, competitive, ritualistic and religious as well as just social, that relationship between the playwright and the audience becomes vital to understanding the texts. These plays were written with a very specific viewership in mind, and so to understand their themes, their reasons for existing, we must consider who would have sat in those ancient stone seats, and who would have been excluded. It's very easy to find misogyny in ancient Athenian culture. It's present in their philosophy, in their literature. The grammar of the language itself renders women in the presence of men invisible. And although they did have some important roles in burial, in religious festivals, and in certain priesthoods, women were fundamentally domestic. They were kept separate, made other. We don't know whether they would have been allowed to take part in this festival, but their presence determines whether tragedy is something challenging, subversive, and radical, or more akin to propaganda, there to reinforce a culture's customs and prejudices. There's ambiguity in those texts, a conflict. And when thinking about tragedians and playwrights who really embody that struggle, who walk that line between subversion and propaganda, Euripides, the latest of the Athenian tragedians, is the one who comes to mind. His Medea murders her children, but despite the horrific fact of this act, she remains throughout the play justified, rational, and sympathetic to the audience and to the chorus on the stage. She ends the play ascending in a chariot like a god, chaos below her, but despite this, she is palpably triumphant. She is a woman in a world ruled by men who thinks and feels and suffers and argues and kills and speaks. She is powerful. Likewise, his Bacchic chorus are, although they are wild and chaotic, although they subvert their cultural roles, leaving their looms to revel on the mountainsides and worship Dionysus, end the play vindicated in that fanaticism. They end it free, their cult more powerful and their god revered and upheld. The opening monologue of Medea is such a powerful testament to what it means to be a woman in a world ruled by men, to what it means to suffer under patriarchy, that thousands of years after Euripides wrote it, it was read at the beginning of women's suffrage movements. These plays, when in the hands of women, are radical. They are revolutionary, symbols of strength. And if they were originally meant for a female audience, it proves that tragedy is a space for culture to move forward, for ideas to expand, for bridges to be built, and for empathy. But we must also consider the alternative, the one where there are no women in those ancient stone seats, because they are absent, excluded. And what is left in their place are men, Athenian men, farmers, politicians, most of them at some point soldiers, fiercely patriotic, and by their culture, xenophobic as well as misogynistic. And suddenly, these women, these strong, powerful, independent women, are not idols, they are threats. Here is what happens if you let a woman think. Here is what happens if you give them freedom. Behold her fury, behold the chaos. The very characteristics which we would choose to idolize are twisted into something to fear, to hate. And tragedy becomes a space to reinforce that fear and hatred and oppression. The truth is, we don't know if women would have sat in those seats, if they would have been allowed to watch the plays. The texts are too ambiguous. But that ambiguity is also what makes them powerful and what makes them timeless. Because although when it is dealt without critical thinking, without analysis, without context or nuance or empathy, it can be difficult and divisive. It is also what can bring people together behind a piece. If we go back to that initial shadowed auditorium, you may not be thinking about the people next to you, but you should be. Their perspectives and their experiences are putting meaning into the narrative as much as the playwright or the actors. Everyone, the viewer and the viewed, is building these stories, and that is why theatre is still a place for community and representation. Thank you.